Okay, so we now have an official 9-minute long release trailer for Death Stranding, the new game by Hideo Kojima. Now, I'll just come out and admit it now, I am a massive Kojima fan. Ever since I played the original Metal Gear Solid in 1998, I've been hooked on Kojima's games. He creates these amazingly rich, believable, but fantastical worlds with all these flamboyant characters in them, and then he weaves a story within that world that just draws you in. Now, probably the biggest news for a lot of people is we now have a release date for this game, November the 8th, 2019. That's right, we're getting it this year. Now, that was a huge surprise for me and probably for a lot of people. I was expecting it to be a 2020 release at earliest, probably a launch title for the PlayStation 5. Not that I'm complaining, I can't wait to get my hands on the game. But I was a bit concerned because Metal Gear Solid 5 was rushed towards the end of production. Konami apparently did put pressure on Kojima to put the game out before it was fully cooked. But I can't imagine Sony, who are backing this game, would make the same mistake. I think they trust Kojima. They know how much experience he's got at making these types of games. And I'm sure they would have left him to do his thing and only put this game out when it was ready. And what really excites me about these trailers is they're not just fancy CG sequences that are pre-rendered. This is in-game footage, real-time game engine footage, cutscenes and gameplay from the actual game itself. Now, Kojima has said that he wants the game to be about bringing people together, stressing the importance of human connections. So that does make you think there might be some sort of multiplayer aspect to the game. Exactly what that is, we don't really know yet. But the theme of the game does seem to be about reuniting humanity. But there's this militant separatist faction that wants to stop you from doing that. Now, Kojima has said it's going to be an open world game, and it certainly looks like that from looking at the trailers. There's some nice vistas overlooking these huge areas, and there definitely seems to be a lot of variety there as well. There's a snowy area, there's sort of grassy open plains, there's more rocky cavernous areas. Now, how those areas are all tied together, is it one seamless world? We just don't know. The actual structure of the game is still a mystery, but I'll be really interested to find out what Kojima's done. Now, being an open world game, does that mean we're going to have like a survival aspect to it? Are we going to have to forage for food and materials? Is there going to be crafting? I kind of hope not. I mean, Kojima, I don't think he's going to go down that road. There's so many games like that. I think Kojima's more interested in the story, and I don't think he really wants things that are going to get in the way of that. Now, we know the landscape is a decent size because you actually get to ride around on a bike, and it's typical Kojima, like futuristic, looks amazing. Kojima has some fantastic concept guys working for him. Now, the handling of the bike, I'm not so sure about it. I'm sure it'd be okay. I do like third person when you're riding around on vehicles. I find that fun. Now, I appreciate that third person games are not everyone's cup of tea. They much prefer first person. They find it more immersive, and that's true. But I think in this type of game where you're navigating these big beautiful environments, third person gives you sort of more of an overview. And there's also melee combat in this game, and I just feel that that works much better in third person. So I think Kojima's made a good choice. Now, I really love how dynamic the world looks. The particle effects, the way you interact with vegetation, the inverse kinematics as you're walking around on these rocky surfaces, these fantastic weather effects are sort of rolling in. And I love that about modern game engines, that they can do all these dynamic weather effects. And Kojima seems to have woven that into the game somehow, like into the story. The rain is referred to as timefall, and it literally does speed up time for anything it hits. You see a crow fall out of the sky and dies or decompose in front of your eyes. Now, in this game you are a delivery man. Doesn't sound that exciting, and there does seem to be a lot of walking around, navigating environments. Even in the earlier trailers you see just a lot of walking around. and it can look quite pedestrian at times, even if it looks beautiful. And some people are a bit worried and a bit critical of that, saying it looks like a walking climbing simulator. But I trust Kojima. I've always enjoyed these games. There's always been plenty of action in them. Even in the trailer we can see there's melee combat and there's gunplay. And don't forget, being a Kojima game, I'm sure there will be some seriously cool boss fights along the way. In one of the earlier trailers we even get a glimpse of what looks like one of the bosses. Now Kojima is a big film buff. I think in many ways he seems like a frustrated film director, like he'd like to be making films rather than games. I remember when I finished playing Metal Gear Solid 2 and I felt as though I'd spent as much time watching cutscenes as actually playing the game. But I think Kojima knows that he needs to deliver some really good gameplay to go along with his fantastic storytelling. So I'm really hoping that he delivers. And what I loved about the Metal Gear Solid games was this mix between this futuristic military hardware that was beautifully designed and realised in the games, and these fantasy elements, like these really way out there characters with these superpowers and abilities. And what I love about these trailers is we can see that we're getting all that and more in Death Stranding. Now I love all the gadgets in Kojima's games and getting to use them. In this trailer we see our first glimpse of the user interface and some of the gadgets. You've got a telescopic ladder to allow you to get across gaps, and there's this stake you can put in the ground to allow you to abseil. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty more gadgets to play with, and I can't wait to see what he comes up with. Stealth is a big part of the Metal Gear Solid games. Creeping around, avoiding detection, people chasing you, and there definitely seems to be continued here in Death Stranding. And this is interesting yellow pulse you seem to emit as you're trying to avoid detection, or maybe you're being tracked in some way. We just don't really know at this point, but it's very intriguing. Now when you die in this game, you don't actually die as such. You go into this other realm that's inverted apparently and underwater, and then you have to find your way back to the real world. It's just crazy stuff. And when you transfer over to this other realm, apparently there's a lot of destruction that occurs and you leave a bit sort of crater behind. And this other world seems to be occupied by these supernatural ghostly sort of beings, but they seem to have a window into our reality. You don't actually see these beings in our world, but you can see their footprints. And I think that's where these babies in the jars come into play, because they're referred to as bridge babies, and they allow you to actually detect these supernatural beings in our world and avoid them. And there's all this black tar everywhere. It's all really weird, totally really weird, and we're only really going to find out and get to the bottom of all this when the game is finally released. Now there definitely seems to have been some huge environmental catastrophe that's taken place, probably man-made. All these sea creatures have beached themselves. There's a mass stranding that's occurred. Obviously that's where the name for the game comes from. But how this all ties in with the supernatural beings and all this black tar everywhere, it's all really intriguing stuff. Kojima definitely knows how to capture people's imaginations. Now Kojima wanted the best tech he could find for making this game. He travelled the world, going to all the top gaming studios, looking at the tools and game engines they were using, and he eventually decided on the Decima engine, which is made by Guerrilla Games, the people that gave us the amazing game Horizon Zero Dawn. Now initially they did concern me, because at Konami he had his own game engine he could use. Using a game engine from another company can be a bit limiting, but I found out that Guerrilla Games had actually given Kojima the source code to the game engine, so he can develop and shape it to his needs. Also, the facial animation tech he's using is top notch. In the trailer you can see just how fantastic the facial animations are, and also the shader tech is top notch. The depiction of all the different materials in the game look fantastic. Now this is purely a guess on my part, but I imagine this game will be running at 30 frames a second on the current consoles. If you want to play it at 60 frames a second, I would imagine you'd have to wait to play it on the PlayStation 5 or PC. Now I know that Metal Gear Solid 5 ran at 60 frames a second on the PS4, but that was a cross-gen game. Now there are snippets in the trailer where it looks as though you're going back in time. Now I'm not a fan of time travel games, so I hope that's not the case. I think what we're looking at maybe is an echo of the past that you're kind of experiencing. And there are some bits in the trailer that also look as though you go into first person. Whether you're actually in control at that point, or whether that's just part of a cutscene, we don't know. But it's interesting. There definitely seems to be a lot of photogrammetry that's been used in this game to capture these amazing environments with all their textures and material properties. And that goes for the objects in the games as well. And the facial scanning for the actors looks absolutely top notch, looks so realistic. But one of the things that really blew my mind was seeing Lindsay Wagner in a modern computer game, but as she looked in the 70s, when I was growing up watching Bionic Woman, it was like time had stood still. It's like, what's going on here? He's playing with my mind. That's the sort of thing Kojima comes up with. There's so many interesting ideas going on in these trailers. You can watch them several times and there's all these little things that intrigue you. I remember in an earlier video seeing a plastic doll sort of float towards Del Toro's character's feet, and you see that the plastic doll's belly sort of been opened up and there's stitches there. And if you look at Del Toro's character's forehead, you can see a big scar that goes all the way around as if the top of his head's been taken off and his brain's been operated on for some reason. Now, is that the good guys? Is that the bad guys doing that? It's like the more you watch the trailers, the more questions you have. Now I can understand why Sony would want Kojima to do an open world game, because that's what sells well. Like if you look at the big sellers, Red Dead 2, GTA, Fallout 4, Skyrim, The Witcher 3, they're all open world games. And if you're investing in a AAA production, you need to sell a lot of units. I think open world games sell well because it gives people the freedom to go off and explore and kind of make their own story. Like there's story there that like you can progress the main quests when you're ready to do so, and at the end of an open world game things do get sort of tied together and there's normally a big finale. But that doesn't really sit well with the way Kojima likes to make games. His games seem to be very story driven, focused, and I do question whether or not this open world that Kojima's making is going to be worth exploring. Is it going to have any real consequence to the actual game itself, or is it going to feel superfluous? Is it just going to be a means of getting from A to B to progress the story? So that does concern me, but I do trust Kojima. He knows what he's doing. I'm sure he'll pull it all together and make it work, and we're going to end up with an amazing game. Okay, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really hyped for Death Stranding and I hope you are too. Okay, goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.